I pulled out an old article from the Context Institute that was reporting on a study from Stanford Research Institute that sort of identified 9 different, this was years ago, but 9 different lifestyles that cut across the United States. And basically in 4 groupings. One grouping is like the people who are just trying to make it. They're just trying to survive. They're holding on by their fingertips for one way or another. And that's about 11% back then. And then there was a bunch of people who are totally caught up and trying to make it in the society as it is. And this is everything from just belongers who just trying to make it all the way to people who are really successful in our current society and they think is wonderful. And that's 2/3 of the population.
Wow.
And then they had a section, it was very interesting. They had a section of inner directeds, that these are people who are, they made a comment, they said, in the United States, the only really inner directed people that get developed are ones who tried to make it in the outer directed world and it didn't work. And 2% of those are what they call socially conscious, but that's about 20%. I don't have these memorized. 20%, and then there's 2% of people they're calling integrated, and these are people who are kind of trying to balance the internal and the external. And I kept thinking this week about that first chapter in this book where Dwayne Elgin was saying, this book is, I forget the word he used, but this book is for brave warriors. It's people who really want to face things. And I was thinking, that's what he's talking about is that 1 or 2% of which maybe a number of us are kind of a part of that, who really have got ourselves focused on and interested in 50 years from now and what might really happen and what are the implications for now. And there's a whole lot of other people that are like, they're walking their dogs and trying to get to work and raise their kids and be good people. Anyway, it just struck me that I was kind of getting a little bit irritated that everybody didn't like me. That a lot of people, I'm sitting outside taking break from painting and watch people go by and they're running and they're exercising their dogs and they're doing, one thing after another. And I thought, there's a lot of aliveness there without having a 50-year scenario of collapse and rebirth. Anyway, that was an interesting conversation I had with myself.
But that 2/3 population that you talked about, at least they could be open to looking at the films suggested in this reading, to be willing to sign social media or whatever to assist in the 50 years from now.
Yeah, and we need to move on, but it dawned on me, yes, but for a lot of people, they're not looking for the opportunity to be scared to death. They're looking for some better way to operate, some better way to live. And so for me, this part 4 is really important because he's trying to spell out, he says, how do we in our social imagination grasp what's possible now? And so we're going to be on those 4 chapters. And to get us started, I'm going to ask all of you to mute yourself and turn things over to Cheryl, who is going to lead us in a short meditation.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
If everyone is settled, we'll breathe in. I'm going to breathe out. You can continue that at your own pace, please. I'm going to talk just a little bit, but I'll try to be mellow and calm. A few weeks ago, we did a timeline out 7 decades. Tonight, we're going to go back a few decades. So breathe in. Breathe out. I want you to try to remember a garden, maybe what you might call your favorite garden in your life. Was it your grandfather's or your Aunt Louise's or your own? And the garden has been freshly plowed or tilled or however it was turned over. So I want you to bend over, maybe take a breath first. Bend over and get a handful of that soil in both hands maybe, and kind of scrunch it up in your hands and smell the earth, the rich, dark soil. It's probably moist. If you smell it, I don't know, it just smells earthy. There's a whole little universe that lives in that soil. Now go out a few months, and after a summer of sunshine and rain, the corn is as tall as your grandfather. The tomato plants are heavy with tomatoes. The green beans, the okra, whatever your garden has, zinnias, marigolds, it's all there. You can smell the tomatoes. When you were kids, you might have even just eaten one right off the vine. The produce is so fresh, and this garden was probably a huge part of sustaining that family for that year. When we think of the soil in the world and all the food that is grown that supports life for 7 billion people, and how many billions of plants and of insects and animals, it's truly an amazing, amazing thing. Breathe in, please, and breathe out. You're going to go to another time point in your life. This time you're going to think about water. I don't know if you might be, for those of you over across the world, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean, or a river, a stream, a lake. Think back to a time maybe you were with family or just friends or even alone. So you're in the water, maybe you're windsurfing, maybe you're canoeing or kayaking on the lake or the river. There might be a mist over the water or fog. If it's an ocean, the waves just keep rolling in and rolling in. And all those bodies of water are filled with life, with fish and just every imaginable creature under the water. It's truly an amazing universe of its own. And whether or not you're on top of the water or floating on the water or under the water, it's such a beautiful life. It's amazing. Breathe in, breathe out. One more stop on our time travel. If you can go back somewhere in your childhood, you can feel the breeze on your face. Perhaps you just learned how to ride a bicycle, or it's wintertime and you're ice skating across the pond or the lake. You might be snow skiing in the mountains, but you've got the wind on your face, the crisp, cool air, or the warm summer air. If you've just learned how to ride your bicycle, you're on top of the world because you think you can do anything. Or if you're out snow skiing or ice skating with friends or family, the beauty of the mountains, the beauty of the winter, it's just an amazing part of the year to be alive. Please take a breath in, breathe out. So for one last stop on our time travel back in time, think back sometime maybe in your childhood to a campfire. I know when we were kids, everyone liked to go camping or Girl Scouts or church. We'd have a big bonfire. You might be roasting hot dogs or marshmallows. Kids might be catching fireflies. When you'd first start the fire, the little sticks and twigs would sputter and catch. And then once a little flame was going and you could see smoke, you could add a little bit more wood or kindling to the fire to help it grow. The smoke and the smell. Anytime you're out and about in the world, I think if you smell a campfire, it takes you back in time to a place where life was simpler. Anyway, when you think about fire, our ancient ancestors, once they could master fire, they really started to progress. You know, they could cook the food they caught, the animals. And now in our day and age, the fires out west are such a threat to so much life. But in its purest form, fire is needed, and for heat and for food. Anyway, take a breath in, please. Take a breath out. I think we're all alive. I think over the past few weeks, we've all been looking at the earth through different eyes, trying to appreciate it more than maybe we have. I watched a short video this week, and one of the sayings in the video was, if we care for the earth will take care of us. And I know you're all part of that group that are taking care of the earth. And so my prayer for you is that the earth will take care of you. So anyway, please breathe in, breathe out. And I will turn it over to James. Thank you.
So Sunny, if you could, so we're a little different format this week. We're going to go into our breakout rooms, and each breakout room is assigned a chapter.
Okay.
And you'll go through, and then we'll come back and report as a whole group and reflect a little bit, and then get our assignment for next week. So Sunny, if you could set the breakout groups with say 50 minutes of time, and then a 2-minute warning to come back, and then send us to our groups. Joyce, you're muted.
Oops. Hi, everybody. I'm talking while I'm muted. Excuse me. Welcome, everybody. Frida, hi.
Good to be back.
And hello, Mylan. And Barrett, we talked like an hour ago. Hi again. And Jim, hi, welcome. Our group is the group that is going to focus on community building. And just thinking about community building took me back to a lot of memories of community building in our earlier ICA, EI community. But before we go too far into that, let me just check in with people about the assignment this past week was to really notice the aliveness around you or within you. Just to notice aliveness, that's interesting. In your daily walking or being out in the world in any way, what did you run into? What did you notice? Or were you able to sort of practice that? I know we have really a practice kind of assignment to notice several times a day, try to notice several times a day. The
I
aliveness.
practiced. I actually got in a fight with my friend who wanted to buy us both watches where we'd set the alarms and it would go off sporadically and you would notice aliveness was the assignment we had,
Yeah,
that you might
yeah.
want to set an alarm. She
Yep.
was doing a kind of a reflection on, life and what was important. And I didn't want a new watch to do that. We had to fight, and I thought, well, that's aliveness. But I mean, I had the nature stuff too. I appreciated Jim sharing his. He's real good about sharing from, and it helps. And then Evie put hers up on the thing. It was precious. But let's hear from some of the others.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, this morning, Paul and I were sitting out on the porch having a cup of coffee, and the critters all come out at that same time because he feeds them. And we had a squirrel, birds, chipmunks, all eating from the same piece of food that's spread out there. And it was really just a delight to watch. I'm complete.
Good.
Well,
Anyone
we have a swimming pool in our apartment complex here. We live in a co-op with about 82 apartments
Wow.
and cottages, and it has a community swimming pool, and I in the summer it's not heated, so in the summer I use it. In the winter I don't. But I was kind of down today, and I had I was tired, and I was kind of moping around, and I just said to myself about an hour ago before we got going here, I've got to get in the pool. And so I went out and I just started. I call it swimming, but it's really jumping in the pool, and but I actually did about 8 or 10 laps of the pool, and I did some backstrokes and breaststrokes and various strokes, and it just and then I just sat there looking at the breeze blowing the trees, and it felt more alive than I had when I was sitting moping in the apartment. So it was a moment of aliveness, I guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, Mylan, how aliveness comes in the body. And if you're not, when you're moving, I was sitting on the porch earlier this morning, and here came this guy up the street, and he was jogging slower than anybody I've ever seen. But he's excited to do it, and I clapped for him. He smiled.
I know I was swimming this morning too. We have a pool as well in our community, and I just always come out feeling very mellow. This morning we had a couple of ducks that decided this was their pool too. And rather than seeing it as a, I don't know, issue or problem, I just totally love these ducks being there. They're great. But I also have, I was thinking this week about times when I really felt alive myself in the past. One of the most memorable times was when I got to where I could actually ski down a mountain, ski from the top to the bottom. And at a certain point, I recall just sort of like the mountain carrying me down. Just I sort of was out of control, but still not falling, right? Somehow my skis were taking me down the mountain. And it was so exhilarating. Oh my gosh. Another memory I had about aliveness was being in Tanzania and being in this village where we would get up at 4:30 in the morning to see the sunrise, because the sunrise would come up all within 1 minute, like 45 to 50 seconds. It would just be dark and then it would be light. And that was also just made you feel like you were part of this amazing creation. I don't know. One of the women in our group, I recall, when we were first getting together as a team, she was from Washington, D.C., a young adult woman who had very prominent parents. And the question going around the group was, well, what brought you here? Why are you here? What, you know, sort of, what's your goal in being here? And this young woman said, I just want the experience of really being alive. And which hit me too, because I had years where I just did all the right things, all the things you're supposed to do as a really young adult. And I didn't feel that alive. But then there's some experiences where it's just totally different than that. Did people get, were you able to look into the building community section of our reading? The chapter 12, page 144, 145, 146. Were people able to, I know that got changed sometime during the week, so.
Could you just, some of us, oh, Mylan, you work off iPad. I do too, but okay.
You want me to find the passage? You mean?
Yeah, I mean,
140.
144
Yeah, okay.
to 146.
144.
okay, it is. That is what I read. That's what I read a couple times. I didn't think of it as a chapter per se, but part of part 4.
Sort of a sub-chapter, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in the right ballpark.
Yeah, it's in part 2, the reconciling section.
Yeah.
But I was really intrigued by this. And I know some people mentioned in the bigger group having had experiences with either co-housing communities or other intentional communities. But what struck you about any of, the pocket neighborhoods or eco villages or transition towns?
You really want to know?
Yeah, I really want to know.
Okay, well, one of the things that struck me it's in the part of eco villages. There's a list in that second little paragraph about the kinds of things you'd want to have in your thingy: a childcare facility, play area, common house for community meetings, celebrations, regular meals together, an organic community garden, recycling, composting, renewable energy grid, open space for community, perhaps a play space and conversation space, tools, crafts. Nothing about spiritual celebration is the closest thing to any kind of a space that, or a thingy that would hold what I'm interested in doing in life. And I think we need more of if we're going to overcome the selfishness, greed, and apathy that he talks about at the very beginning. Anyway, that struck me. Nothing
Yeah.
there.
Are you on?
Yeah, that struck me. That
I'm
strikes me.
here.
Go ahead. Anybody else?
Well, I was just reflecting on Northfield, where we live, Northfield, Minnesota. It really is an extraordinary town, and it's very full of people who are engaged and that kind of stuff. And when we were starting a co-op, now it's just doubled in size, but just putting that team together, it took nothing. I mean, said we're going to have a meeting and make a little plan to start a co-op, and like 20 people showed up, and they went on teams, and more people joined, and 2 years later we had a co-op. But that's the way things happen in the town. People are very engaged, and yeah, and it's just really rich. And I think part of that richness comes from, it's a small town, about 20,000, and two colleges, which are very environmentally conscious.
Yeah, two very wonderful colleges. Yeah,
I was struck how much the emphasis was on physical design. There's the kind of the soft community building means, getting people together and stuff. But I think it is a real good point that a lot of, well, especially in this country, the way suburban developments are designed is kind of not help. I mean, it's really helpful the way they're designed for work-focused individual success, high carbon use communities. They're really, I mean, they really fit with our consumer society. And wow, the massive physical I don't know the right word, but physically designing this in a different way is very large. But then I think to myself, what about other places in the world? And I think to myself about, what about rural? What about urban? Suburban is kind of uniquely designed, but anyway.
yeah.
I've been struck lately and disappointed, I must say, at seeing the stock of new housing that's being built. I just was back in Oklahoma for a couple of weeks, and they're built just house after house after house after house, just right up next against each other. And I don't know if inside it has some of these features that would help with community, but he says right at the beginning that your design of communities is vital for transforming how we live. Here, we have development going on. I don't want it because of our water situation in California, but we have it going on, and they're building these McMansions, 2-story, huge places that people are going to have to clean. And I mean, I don't know why everybody wants. Now, my age people are looking for a 1-story, but that's not what the new housing stock is. It's
Where are you, Elfrida?
I'm in Marina, California, and this morning, that's Monterey Bay area, I heard that our governor make an announcement. We're just going to devote $13 billion. He signed it today. That's a lot of money, 13B, to handle homelessness. And that's going to be a big part of it, is affordable housing. Well, I don't know how it's going to get built. I don't know who's going to do it. That's not what I'm seeing built. without that influx.
Mm.
It's
Yeah,
troubling,
we're
though.
looking at the same thing in Southern California. I mentioned that we live in a co-op, and one of the things that attracted us to this place 40 years ago was that it was kind of a unique in California, in Southern California anyway, a co-op, and so we got involved and got on, the board. Linda became president of the board, and then later I became president of the board, and I became temporary manager, and we kept trying these community building things and reaching out to people. We had a few people that we could connect with at that level, but to try and turn this co-op into a community, we just burned ourselves out on it. And
Mhm.
we still have some pluses about this, but God, it's hard. and,
Mhm.
and it gets discouraging.
Well, I think design is really critical. We live in a community called the Prairie Hills Townhomes, and it's like one street divides the two, but they're right across, and they're in a half, each is in a half moon, and in the center of each circle is a very large island of flowers and garden and stuff like that. And there are probably 10 to 11 families in each one, and there's a board and stuff, but it's very operates very collectively. Everybody comes out in the spring and the fall and works on the garden. Everybody contributes to a
Mhm.
certain amount a month. If there's this hailstorm that destroys the roofs, it's a committee just takes care of it, and it gets done. One year the house was sided because the hail was so bad. But it's and it's not like people are really together all the time, but people notice what's happening with each other, like and help each other out. And then we have, like, the women have coffees once a month, and whoever wants to host or come can come. So you get a chance to talk to each other and find out what's going on. And once a year we have a Christmas or a holiday gathering, and people are all just very very, very interesting and experienced in all kinds of international travel, international work. It's really quite a few people who came from farms, and as they got older, they kept their farms, but they didn't want to live and do everything on them anymore. But it's a really not good place to live. I mean, we can go away for 4 months and feel fine about that.
Mhm.
Sounds like a pocket neighborhood.
Turn to
Yes,
page,
it is. It's
turn to
all
page
older
one.
people, though. It is all older people. I don't think there's probably anybody there under 60.
Turn to page 140,
Is that also, oh, I'm sorry.
140?
146.
Okay.
He sticks a real hooker in the end of this chapter. He says, in this century, millions of innovative forms of sustainable and satisfying modes of living are surely going to be developed.
Mhm.
Alternative communities of every imaginable design will be adapted to local conditions and provide islands of sustainability, relative security, and mutual support by intentional connections with one another in an increasingly chaotic world. Then he says, yet the strength
Yeah.
of local self-organizing communities can be a weakness if they are seen as isolated havens of safety to weather the storms of transition. Lifeboats won't save us when the entire earth is sinking and becoming inhospitable to the biology and psychology of human life. It is important for the cohesion realized through local collaborations of mutual support to be able to reach widely and provide the social glue to hold larger networks together.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there needs to be the local and the building up to the eco-sustainable cities. And yet, if the rest of the earth is crashing, it's like a little lifeboat. It it can't do what it could do if everyone was doing community building, right? So say in a sentence or two, anyone, what do you take from that insight? I mean, how would you share what you were just reading to us? How would you share that in a sentence or two with a larger group? Because I was totally taken by that too.
Mhm. I think it's really important not to become insular and have that community be the whole life. I mean, where we live, it's very external. I mean, everybody is involved in all kinds of things in all sorts of ways in governing the city and, you know, being a part of programs for seniors, all kinds of things. And yeah. It's not a protection. It for me, it can't have a protect us from the outside feel.
It's hard for me to get in my imagination if the collapse is really advanced and serious, how without the kind of technology we have come to rely on for those connections beyond the pocket and beyond the neighborhood and beyond, you know, where we are, if that's gone, you know, I don't know what's going to replace that. That it's kind of scary to me to think, because the whole grid could, you know, be disrupted, and all of this wonderful stuff we rely on to connect with the outside world and other places in the world. If that goes down and we're isolated, it's hard to, it's not impossible, but it'll be a lot more painful, I think.
Well, that would create a stark difference in terms of the necessity of connecting with neighbors physically near.
Yeah.
If those other things began to be cut off.
But that also could increase the likelihood of that insulation and just sort of protecting our space.
Sort of the islands, of support.
Yeah. When we're living here in Wisconsin, there is a feel for us of wanting to stay protected. On the way into town here, one of the families on one of the big farms has put up a billboard. It's the first 24 campaign sign, maybe in the country, and of course it's for Trump, but it, you know, has flags. I mean, it's big. It's right on the main road coming in here. And Wisconsin is just really Trumpian country. In fact, we've kind of quit going to a local thing that's a bar type restaurant that's been going for a very long time. They've expanded and it's a gazillion trailers and people are just swarming all over the place. And you can tell from the way people are dressed that they're mostly Trump supporters because they're pretty visible, you know, and so this whole part of the country here is, I mean, for me, one of the things, how can we do these things when we have such an extraordinary political divide in the country and see no way, it's very hard to see a way of working with each other. And it's very different here than where we live in Minnesota. And Wisconsin has a totally different feel to it than does Minnesota. And I think part of it is the political divide.
So right now, just for everybody in the group, Barrett is in her Wisconsin cabin, which is in a very Trumpian part of Wisconsin, as opposed to her very progressive Northfield, Minnesota, which is an ideal kind of community in the other direction.
We live very solitarily here and love it.
And it's good to have that option. I mean, how to hang on to some of that, too.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So I want to have us, because we're getting sort of close to the time, I think. Jim, maybe check a watch or time.
23 minutes and 45 seconds left.
Oh, okay. 23 minutes
In our
left
group, in our
in
group.
our group. Okay, so we're good.
But we're gonna make a report.
We are
So-
going to make a report, and that's what's on my mind is, my thought would be to have someone volunteer to make the main points that we're coming up with, and then the rest of us be responsible for adding any insights or things we might have missed that were important in our conversation. So, but could we have someone volunteer to make main points? And I've written down 3 of them so far. The idea that the design of your community is essential and critical in terms of how you can build the actual relationships in a community. And I think that was Barrett talking there for the most part. And the second one being that we can't become insular. We have to connect to the larger life around us. And not think of our little small community as a protection from the outside world, but more a way to reach up and out and connect to the outside world. And 3, and I think this was Mylan talking, how do we work through the divide in our country toward what we say is important here and what the author is saying is important here? That not only are we building up something new in the way of just a newly woven together community that shares much more and has a greater simplicity of life, but greater commonality, greater stronger sense of community. But at the same time, how do we do that when we're so divided as a country? That is a good question.
Yeah, I think that was Barrett, actually.
Is that Barrett? Okay.
Yeah.
And then, how about, is there another point we're seeing here, or another thought, another insight from
Well,
what?
I did make the point about technology.
Mhm.
If that collapses along with
Oh.
everything else, the other institutions of social connectedness, that's kind of a big
Yeah.
factor in our I mean, because just this weekend we were on another Zoom call with some other colleagues, and Jim and I were in that group, and that was a reaching out that was refreshing and aliveness. So there's that connection to the outside and the
Yeah.
other places.
Yeah.
So this is, this part 4 is really about opportunity. That
Mhm.
having looked at what the data seems to be saying about the next 50 years, what are the wonderful opportunities in front of us? And here, the wonderful opportunity is we're going to have to rebuild community, and the whole settlement pattern at the end of this century is going to be way, way different
Mhm.
than it is now. The infrastructure of it, the settlement patterns, and it's not going to be based on. It's not necessarily going to be based on our notions of community. I appreciate what Mylan was saying about,
Mhm.
we have, from being with the Institute, we have this notion of community
Yeah.
and people are working together and celebrating together and all that stuff. And people don't just like go, oh my God, that's wonderful. We'll do that. That's great. And also, I mean, I think what he's not just saying only planetary liberals are going to move into community. He's saying willy-nilly, there's going to be a rebuild of community, and it hadn't fundamentally to do with, well, I think he would say that our divide, our divisiveness in this country is more the result of our settlement patterns than it is the cause.
Mhm.
Yeah, that doesn't, I'm not so sure about that. If we had to divide into settlement patterns right now, I think it'd be political. And that's for me extremely dangerous. I think we're moving in an extremely dangerous direction, that the political divisions aren't being reduced, they're being intensified. And I don't have a way. I mean, I don't even, it's like I don't even want to approach anybody about politics. There's sort of a non-rational, impassioned stake in the ground that I think is bordering on terrifying. And I think it's growing.
Well,
And I
Okay.
don't know how to counter that. I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
because the thing that's most noticeable in this country is the politics. And that is what has destroyed a lot of civilizations over the years. And so, I mean, when things really get bad here, what is going to happen? Are people going to divide into their political conclaves, build walls and shoot each other? I think it's really terrifying.
There will be some of that, Barrett, but I
Yeah.
really, I'm not as terrified as you. I know, I feel you, I feel your pain, but I think we are slowly getting through this, and a lot's going to depend on, the next few years. This decade is really critical on a number of fronts. But I think we're going, that part of it, I think, is not going to be the determining factor.
What will be the turn? What will it that will turn things? It's like now in the midst of the pandemic, it's resurging again because of a huge group of people that refuse to take it seriously. And I mean, what is it that's going to happen to make a shift so the camps don't get more divided,
Mhm.
I mean, I like to think about that, but you land in this part of the country and it doesn't look all that opportune, like that opportunity is here much.
I have to step aside just a second. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Continue the conversation.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
the camps aren't two though, Barrett.
What,
There's a
what,
whole-
Elfrida?
they're not two camps, there's more camps.
Oh, yes.
We've got
yes.
this inner city, people of
Yeah.
color that will not get vaccinated. They don't trust it,
Yes, yeah,
Anyway,
thanks.
the thing about, we said that we can't become insular. Well, it seems to me that it sort of depends on whatever the local is, has to be represented, has to be counted on to be diverse. Or you are just going to have these pockets of insularity. And we do have this great migration going on right now of political division, of living. We've got all the people who don't like California going to Idaho just by the, anywhere else.
Yeah.
We've got, because California's blue and we want to go where it's red, kind of thing. And so it is going on, the division. And I know it seems to be the biggest thing that we have to contend.
That is true, but some of them are going to Texas, and Texas is getting more blue, so.
And they're changing it in Texas, I hope.
They're trying to
hope they're
keep it
changing
red, but
The
yeah.
attitudes in Texas. But we've got to, well, it was helpful. Jim said this is about opportunity to structure it so that it would be different. If you just keep living with the divide.
So I guess we're going to have to come to terms with what is no longer possible and what is still possible in this conversation. That, there's some things we're not going to be able to stop. We're not going to be able to change. There are other things we do have some say and some impact on.
I guess I'm back with Barrett's description of Northfield because I also know Northfield, not as well as she does, but I admire Northfield as a really cultural, creative kind of community. And is there a lesson or something we could draw from a community that does seem to work well for the people that could help build, because he's building up from these very small micro groups to a sustainable city size thing? What about the size of maybe not the 10, 12 people pocket neighborhood, but more like the eco villages or the micro communities that have hundreds or small town levels of people? What can we draw from what does work? What is working in a place like Northfield, just as an example?
But Joyce, that isn't working totally. I mean, the Hispanic community has been more integrated into the community, and there are Hispanic businesses, et cetera, and you interact with people on the street. The Black community is not visible in Northfield except at the colleges. I mean, I do not know of one Black-owned business in town. Walking down the street, going to the bookstore, going to the library, whatever, you see very, very few Black human beings. And so that's huge for me. I mean, that's just huge.
Yeah, we have a similar situation in Redlands. This project Linda is working on that is based on the ANCA program from Denver. We have the kind of community that's about 70,000, but it still has enough of that community feel that there's a lot of community activities that go on. Like we have a summer concert series that thousands of people come to and interact sociably and without a lot of rancor. And so this community building from the neighborhood level, we think may have some possibility that can still connect throughout the city, because we do have the city sponsorship, the university sponsorship, a big employer on some involvement in the what do you call the authorization and support level, but then the working at the neighborhood level, making these connections on a project to just come up with plan for resilient neighborhoods. So we'll see how it goes, but I think a community of your size, Barrett, to our size, maybe even a little larger, still could be a viable community.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like the hearts and minds of men are going to have to change to create a different desire of what to have in, and I didn't mean men, that, but he talks about moving away from this ego economy into an aliveness economy. I want the people constructing the housing to think differently, but they're going to think differently when we call for different ways of being together. And that seems to me to be a hard issue. So how do we take advantage of the opportunity we have to change the settlement pattern by the end of the century?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's amazing. Oh.
They say by
Well, there's such diversity also, how, there's a lot of effort, I haven't lived in a central city for a long time, but there's a lot of effort in terms of community gardens, a lot of activism. These transition towns and stuff is there. This eco-civilization. China has it in their policy, their official policy as a country, that they're they're gonna be an ecological civilization. So there's at that level, and I had lunch with Sunny Walker yesterday. And she's been talking about these neighborhood things, and she talked about how in some ways the city of Denver is ahead of the neighborhoods
Mm.
in trying to move towards something more sustainable. And so I think there is momentum at these different settlement levels. And then I don't even know how to talk about that. There are so many people buying and selling houses and buying and selling houses. And many people are trying to sell a house so they can buy a house cheaper
Mhm.
somewhere else that they could live. So this kind of, in that sense, there's a kind of a beginning of this migration, refugee kind of thing,
Yeah.
where people are realizing what's going on, but the pressure to towards the McMansion kind of development, it feels really strong, though. Yeah, it's.
Mhm. Hey, Jim, you've got a different background. Have you moved?
Yeah, I went
No,
to the
he's-
bathroom and I came back, but
No, he says.
No, behind you.
I was thinking
Are
as
you
you
gonna-
were,
I've been sitting out on, I've been out on the porch because everybody else was home having dinner, but everybody went out. So I'm alone in the house I've got 3 birds and 3 dogs and me.
We hear the birds.
Yeah,
I noticed the dog once.
Yeah.
there's the birds.
um,
But have you all read, I think it's Octavia Butler? She's
no,
a science fiction writer.
Mm-mm.
no.
Oh my God.
Write it down.
She,
What's a book?
I don't remember. I read half of it. I sent it back to the library. But it was really about, breakdown and collapse and the building of community. But it was not pleasant.
Oh.
It was not pleasant at all. But,
Maybe
get you
let's not go
thinking
too far
about-
in that direction
Yeah.
right now.
Um,
I was thinking of it.
It's gonna take 10, 15 years. Well, see, when you go to think globally,
yeah, then that's another wrinkle.
I think the point of that our hearts are going to need to change. So to move from our head to our heart level in building our future communities, to really respond to people's real needs and not just simply somebody's profit motive in building more units, higher, more stacked together. A lot of it needs to shift to really looking at, what are the community desires, community needs, where's the common space. I live right up the hill from a place that used to have lots of green space to now it's total buildings, just as solid as New York City. And nobody planned for any community green space. But
I had to go to, I got a rash, so I had to go to this dermatologist. And it was 15, not far, 15, half an hour, whatever, south of here. And I got into the town of Lone Tree, which I didn't actually even know existed. And there was an apartment building and an apartment, like, somebody's talking about houses next to one another. These were apartment buildings next to one another.
Mhm.
Boom, 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 block after block.
yeah,
And
that.
I not that I was terrified, but it was like I was terrified. And I was going,
Hyperventilated.
oh, well, and I went, oh my God, there are so many people. And that, I mean, if this is not, what he's describing is not about, the five of us and our friends. It's 7 billion people have to be settled somewhere, going on toward 9 billion people being settled somewhere. In the midst of who knows what's going to happen with the infrastructure. Since I've been reading this book, I go to get a glass of water and I turn the water on and I think, well, thank God it's still running.
Yeah.
Well, there are some scenarios that are predicting a great die-off and a great burn-off. So we need to take those into consideration too. The population is not gonna be sustained.
It's clearly
in
not.
this. Yeah.
Not at the lifestyle level we're living or hoping to live. That's true. Let me ask, who would like to take our
Choice.
4 or 5 major points to the larger group, and helped by all of us, of course. But it seems like we've been working with a design issue, not becoming too insular, connecting with larger life in our community building, how to work through the divisions in our country as we're building new communities, how to weave together the diversity, the differences. That would probably include, we haven't really talked about the economic huge differences, but well, somebody mentioned how do we work in the affordable housing. And then if technology collapses, how do we deal with that? And then having to really move to a heart level as we work with rebuilding community. Communities that are sustainable and that are really supportive to people and not so isolated as we've become, especially in suburban, or urban and suburban places. But anyway, who would like to do that?
I nominate Joyce because she's.
You're very well positioned.
If you get it one more, she'll have it really good.
Took more
I mean,
notes than anybody.
It's the second time you've went through it. You know it. I know it's a lot to dump on you, but I think you're the one.
All right, I'll tell you what, I'll do it if you all chime in. Add any insights or thoughts that you really gained from this conversation too.
And thank you. I'm teasing a little bit, but thank you for listening. I appreciate that you're putting that effort in to kind of hear what's going on and try to capture our thoughts and stuff. But I guess the opportunity is, if you really want to build community and you want an overwhelming challenge, whether you're an architect, an urban planner, a rural planner, infrastructural engineer, by golly, an ombudsman.
10 seconds.
Yeah, 7 seconds. See you on the other side, okay?
If you really want to. What?
Great conversation.
Okay, we can stay.
It says 113 seconds on mine.
We got 112 seconds still to see it.
Yeah.
It's
Where's Joyce
stopped,
go?
and then we've got transition time.
Okay. All right.
What's it going to take to do this?
Well, if they say by the end of the century, people aren't going to own cars. We're going to have, self-driving vehicles that you just summon with your app and takes you where you want to go.
That's assuming we have the resources to do all that stuff.
But I mean,
we're depleting all the resources faster than we're going to be able to build it, I think.
But if we can envision something like that, we can envision a whole new way of living that we don't have to be trapped into this money making, make as much as you can by the builders.
True.
Yeah, we don't have to be trapped in it.
Well,
Okay.
then you just think about all the industry and the changes that are going to have to be made. That's where I kind of hit a wall imaginally, is how does this happen? You know, I mean, big oil, whatever. How does it happen other than a disaster that forces companies into it? Are those big systematic changes going to get done?
Well, that's, I mean, I'm thinking about that video we saw a couple times ago about this notion of lift. All we have to do is wait and it'll all collapse. So that scenario is easy. And the question is, if there's ways for people like us or other people to create enough lift that people don't just go, well, it's collapse.
Oh,
Welcome back. How was your conversation?
Full.
oh, good.
Yeah, very cool.
Good.
So what if we start with 6,
No.
room 6, simplicity, and hear your reports. And I think our idea was like 5-minute reports, and we'd hear all the reports, take some notes so that you'd have a way to ask questions or make comments or connections after, okay?
Yes. We were
Oh.
in,
Is there anybody from,
yes, I am. Can
Jan,
you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Jan Sanders, Group 6. Reporting in. Planet Earth. Planet Earth. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
We can hear you now.
You hear me now?
Where
Good.
you been?
I've been wondering that. Okay, we are inspired by the quote of Gandhi, to live simply so that others can simply live. We intend to put our resources away from material things into innovation. We talked about innovative seeds for creating the future culture. Okay. We want to have the challenging conversations. We acknowledge painfully the conversations it would take to move in these directions, but we are practicing new conversations. We recognize smaller spaces, the whole smaller home movement, smaller houses movement as a way towards this. If you don't have the space, you can't put the stuff. And so that's beginning to happen. Okay. We also then are appreciate all the different types of simplicity, conscious, voluntary, ecological, and want to hold the tension between voluntary and necessity. And that's the space that we're going to create in. We are complete unless my team would like to add something.
I think the piece about wants is that it isn't wants but needs. That decisions are made
Okay.
on the basis of needs, not wants.
Mhm. Good.
I think Martin Luther King had a good statement like that there's enough to meet people's need, but not enough to meet their greed.
Mm.
Mhm.
Okay.
Somebody from that term team, what's really important about this move towards simplicity? What's the opportunity that's there?
Hmm.
I think what the chapter tells us is that the lighter touch we have and begin to develop in our own lives, the more we connect with the non-material things that make life more beautiful for us. So that, and that may be a motivation for continuing the process of moving away from the concentration on the material to those things that are not material in our lives.
Anything else from team 6?
That's good.
Room 6. Room 5.
Okay, I'm gonna try and summarize our conversation. And our focus was on building community and the challenge to really reweave our social relationships and our sense of community, starting at the very, very local level with what's called pocket neighborhoods, moving up to eco villages, which would be a few hundred people in much more sharing ways, participatory ways, and then to micro communities, which would be sort of the small town level. But sharing much more, raising healthy children takes a village, working more together on these things, having much more common spaces for everything from community gardens to renewable energy microgrids, and workshops for the arts and tools and helping repair things, so on. Our conversation emphasized that the design of a community, how you design it, is critical. And we have examples in some of our immediate surrounding areas, wherever we're from, of lots of new high rises going up, just one right next to the other, right next to the other, and just sort of packing people into condos or apartment buildings without much attention to the commons or having common spaces in your community building or ways to bring people together. So the design is important, and keeping the common space as a central part of designing our communities is critical. Secondly, we felt there was that we could easily become insular, and so that it's important to remember how, as we're building from these smaller to these larger, better integrating communities, that we connect with larger life beyond our immediate surroundings, beyond our immediate smaller neighborhoods. And not to look at our communities as a protection from the outside world. Thirdly, we talked about the challenge to how to work through the political divisiveness that we experience now in our country, how to work through that as we're trying to begin to build new and better communities. And maybe not an answer there, but really noting that that's a challenge part of this community building. And then there was the mention of if technology, in terms of the coming collapse that we've talked about earlier, if technology that keeps us connected with other countries and other parts of the world, if that collapses, that would be a big factor in how we need to reconnect and rebuild. And finally, we realized this has to involve a shift from people working out of their head in developing communities to working from their heart. That, as someone said, with the simplicity, going to greater simplicity, we also need to go from our head knowing, the right engineering and all these things. Not that that's not important, but that we need to go from an ego community to an echo community. We need to move to a heart level to experience the richness of community, which is what we are after. So I don't know, does anyone else on our group have anything you'd like to add? I don't know if that captured it. Anybody?
Captured it.
Okay,
You got it.
okay. So that was group
Things
5.
in the chat.
Okay. The chat.
Well, that's for me. I was just, as I was listening to you talk,
Mhm.
the image that came in my mind was when ICA was involved in community development in local communities, you were looking at a geographic framework, a non-geographic framework, and a deliberation framework. And those were called stakes and guilds and the community
Right.
decision-making process. Anyway, so what this brings back in, we've been doing a lot of work with communities of practice, which are non-geographic based. And what the environmental need brings back in is that direct vital need for the geographic to be represented, to be woven together. And so I liked your image of reweaving.
Mm-hmm.
I'm complete.
Thank you.
Someone else?
Jean Watts, did you have a comment?
You're muted at the moment.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. All right. Yeah,
Okay.
I was talking. I was saying that one of the most difficult things, it seems to me, that we will have in building communities, regardless of how we do it, the reason, people get into them for support, for their own reasons really
Yeah.
help, et cetera. And it's the on half of, we're supporting each other on half of something beyond just those of us within the community. That seems to be the most difficult or challenging part in my mind to be able to figure out how to do, especially in, say, like a high rise, or even in just these experimental senior living communities where, over 50 are living in a supportive environment that keeps the whole problems of loneliness and, so, but how would they act on behalf of those not in their community? Reaching out part beyond it. So it's ego on a social level rather than ego on a personal level here.
I just put your thought in a chat note. Thank you.
It was interesting to me that Larry Feldbrook brought up communities of practice. This building community chapter really focuses on the redesign of physical community away from the sort of suburban pattern that's been so prevalent in this country. And no mention at all about the dimensions of community and support that happen in churches and congregations and clubs and in organizations of various kinds that could certainly warrant some thinking. I'm complete. Anything else on here before we move on to team 2 and communicating?
For those of us connected to the Institute, I know not everybody is, but we probably would do religious houses a little different these days.
Ah, like
Yeah.
what?
Say more.
Yeah. We dealt with the economic, we shared our food, we had a mission. There was a lot that would be really cool.
Yeah, we probably would bring the environmental in a little bit more, wouldn't we? That would be an element, one element would be different. But anyhow.
It's one triangle at level 3 on the social process.
Oh, my goodness.
So yes, I think we'd probably bring it in a little differently if we did it today.
But it could be the mission. It could be clear that that's the mission that we need to tackle. Anyway, okay.
I think
How is
also
this-
to assume that there's a lot of possible potential communities evolving and developing.
How is this going to provide lift? It feels to me this building community things is just one more overwhelming thing that's not going to change. But how is moving on this going to produce the sort of lift that turns this into a great transition and not just a collapse scenario?
Well, I think a lot of work has been going on in building communities.
Yeah.
Both, I mean, over the last 30 years, and both both we're particularly in communities of practice. And so I think one of the places is to bring those insights and learnings back into the geographical context, which is sort of in some ways what the reason they've been created was to avoid the geographical context. In other words, I don't like my next door neighbor, so I talk to people across the world. But so how do we take those insights and learnings from the communities of practice locally, globally, et cetera, and re-attack, or whatever the right attack is to this whole thing about voluntary simplicity. I have a real struggle with at what point, how much are you guys going to let me volunteer, and how much are you going to call me up and say, hey, why aren't you here yet? Anyway, so I'm complete.
Time is fleeting, so let's move on to 2 is communicating.
Okay. The quote that took us was that communication is the lifeblood of democracy. And we added on and saving the earth. It's important for people to be heard, and there'll be some more about that in the next report. That holding mass media accountable so that we're not just getting infotainment. And the fact that there's tech everywhere. You really mentioned, cell phone, internet, all kinds of ways of connecting electronically. And by within the in the end of the next decade, 75% of the world is going to have electronic access to each other. So it's sort of like, why wouldn't we be doing that somehow? But both people and the earth need to be having a voice. That's not been happening. But to have that voice, it's a part of our global nervous system. We did also mention, I think I'll mention that later, about the ETMs. Why is it important? Well, if you're going to develop a consensus for a common direction, you have to communicate. And you're never going to get billions of people engaged without them beginning to talk to each other. In terms of how he talked about there being billions that could then begin to really move something. We also noted that if you're going to hold the media accountable, they are supported by a lot of sponsors, and we've got to go back to those product sponsors and hold them accountable along with the media that they're sponsoring. And what will it take to make it happen? One comment was large movements of insistent people. Either that or a whole new media platform, something besides the one we got. that there needed to be support of and connection of loud organizations like the Extinction Rebellion or Greenpeace and many others, and then electronic town meetings that kick off local action. We did a little bit of talking about getting the youth, finding a way to, what did somebody say, let the youth loose, and so that the sunrise movement could get supported by, well, I call it the sunset population, like us, except for a few of you who are younger. And we talked about schools needing to add some strong curriculum, like how to understand the media, how to bring self-consciousness to what's true and what's not. You know, teaching more consciousness and looking at things like news and sorting it out, having some critical thinking. Also cutting the reactionary thing that many of us have either done or experienced from others of, you see something come across social media and you don't even check, is this true or not? You just pass it on. That's been pretty unhelpful in a lot of ways. But if you could teach young people to really question as a part of their discipline, that would be amazing. And then another thing we wanted to do, and this really didn't relate as much to communicating, but to think of all the things that people can do. Well, I guess the idea is communicate those things to people, all the things they can do, and, you know, share that around. And then one of us mentioned that the top 3 things that individuals could do to help with climate mitigation, there were just 3, and recycling was way, way, way down the list somewhere, was to reduce food waste, do family planning, and have a plant-based diet. Those were the 3 top things that, if those were done across the world, make a big difference. Anything my team wants to add?
What was the third one?
A plant-based diet, but what were the other two?
Reduce food waste and family planning.
Mm-hmm.
We did have the thought of running, doing posters and running educational programs at libraries, zoos, schools, etc., and bringing joy to the work. So that we're moving forward with the joy and not the gloom and doom.
Can I add one comment? What we have seen in both Tanzania, east coast of Africa, and in Ghana, west coast of Africa, is that when you educate, especially the girls, to a higher level, that would be either high school graduation or university graduation, the size of the family goes down dramatically. But, you know, it just sort of takes care of itself. Family planning does enter into it then. The young women take much more, or first of all, they're more aware of family planning. They're more aware of how to do family planning, and they actually do more family planning. So.
Helpful.
Yeah.
If I may add a comment, the one thing I would add also is the media. You know, we have the media is what's molding the global brain, and right now we have, you know, like take for instance Noam Chomsky's book Manufacturing Consent. It's proven that all the media are basically businesses, and so what's being produced and given to the global brain is something that fits with the paradigm that those who are running the show want us to have. So we need to deal with censorship and fake news. I mean, just imagine if WhatsApp replaced all these anti-vaxxers with messages talking about the dire climate situation. I think everyone would be then on the heels of the politicians saying, hey, what are you doing about this? You know, we've got the Capitol insurrection. If you could get that kind of energy, you know, to force politicians to deal with the climate change, what we need is the removal of the censorship and also the information overload that comes in, along with the fake news. That's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time marches on. Can we hear from group one? Group one.
So this is reconciliation, right? Reconciling. So I took notes and we were going to summarize it, but we didn't. So I'll read through my notes. So there's so much to deal with in reconciling, social, economic, political, ecological. And we sort of started off with Archbishop Tutu from South Africa, that there's really 3 steps that need to happen in reconciling. One is the injured to be heard. The second is the wrongdoers must apologize publicly. And finally, there needs to be a sense of restitution or reparation. That those 3 dynamics are really critical in this whole reconciling dialogue. We also said that it takes in all hands on deck. Everyone needs to be part of the process. The key is forgive and to go forward. Oxfam laid out this thing that climate change at its most essential is a justice issue. And we talked about how important it is that there were some examples of inviting people of color to hear their experience, particularly like the American Indians, learn to reconnect with people and their experiences and to take time to hear their experience and what their life is like. And that's a real part of the reconciling process. We talked about the religious reconciling, and that there has been a lot of examples of interfaith groups forming and beginning to bridge the gaps between different religions and becoming more familiar with each other. Somebody mentioned that that singing together is a real critical area, that we need to talk about the spirit of our lives and see the diversity. Louis Armstrong is a great example of somebody, a person of color, but had great spirit and a great sense of who he was. Somebody asked about what we learned from the Ecumenical Institute and religious houses. It's a great model. It takes some time to get that set up again. But we also talked about reconciling versus blame. And we need to look at systemic injustice that produces inequality. That's a real underlying dynamic of feeling that we're going to be reconciled. And particularly in the area of finances. And we also talked about this sense of clanness and we build borders around our own internal groupings. And we need to get over that. We need to look at how we can reach out more. We talked about the slaves. They were not paid for their labor, but owners did well, not their intention, but have advantages, huge advantages. And the people who were in the fields just didn't have that kind of an advantage. And then somebody mentioned that we need the fire of suffering to be burnt. Means that we have the opportunity to change when there's nothing there anymore, and we have to rebuild to build a society that's equal, and that we can all live in this world. And there were some questions about, is there an example of how the fire has brought about the kind of change that we're talking about in reconciliation? And it was brought up World War I and World War II, the Great Wars. And when the wars were over, the Europeans could see that they could not live separately. And we formed the European Union. They saw the bloodbath that was created by the war and their families torn apart. And they knew it was not worth it. And so this is an example of the kind of suffering that can produce a new sense of oneness of what's going on. We did the Marshall Plan that really helped them. And so we don't have to let things fall apart, but it is part of our great transition. And we see that in like the Black Lives Change already beginning to happen there. We talked about that. There's some great examples already of reconciling going on. And we talked about the climate action neighborhoods in Denver and other places that are beginning to build up their community and building up community resilience that deals with reconciling in a really deep way. So building community is a key reconciling dynamic. Anything I missed? Team?
Mm, Wow,
Wow.
wow.
2 or 3 reflection. We visited four places that can give lift in this great transition. Community building, communicating, simplicity, and reconciling. What's it going to take? Well, first, what's the opportunity in all this?
Well, the opportunity from the last world wars was the nationalistic walls between European countries were broken. So I think the opportunity when climate change destroys the economic and financial supply lines across the world, it would break down the nationalistic borders between different countries. And hopefully, going forward, nations will not operate from a nationalistic point of view, but try to operate more from an internationalistic economic model, where it is no longer the idea of getting resources and cheap labor, but as a whole community where everyone is considered equally like citizens.
You know, we haven't learned too much from the pandemic experience to bridge that gap. So I'm just wondering what we will have learned, you know, from that to make the bridge to, you know, when climate change becomes an incredible chaos and crisis time. So it's not just wishful thinking that national boundaries will be broken down. They certainly increased during this pandemic, especially in terms of the vaccine distribution and equity.
You know, we mentioned Europe coming together by dropping a lot of their political boundaries. They still have some, but starting with the economic cooperation among 28 nations. But I lived in Europe for a couple of years in Austria, and what I saw when I had a lot of Swedish and Norwegian and other Scandinavian people in my classes, I did a master's degree over there in complex studies, and the Scandinavian countries, including Iceland, each seem to have adopted a country in Africa that they created a special relationship with about development. That they were sort of the mentor or the cheering section, or I don't know, they helped with all kind of not only economic, but sending teams down, healthcare teams to develop new things and so on. For example, Sweden's partner was Uganda. And not that other European countries didn't help Uganda, but that each European country really had a partner in the developing world that they assumed responsibility for. And I think that's a great model. You know, maybe even in our country, we could consider doing something like that by our states, because our states are as big as a lot of countries. But anyway, that's
one more comment and then we'll close, but then we'll come back for our little after session. Who has a different reflection to share?
I was thinking that many of the things we talked about are things that we can do as individuals or as small communities. but a lot of stuff that affects the world has to do with systems that we support, particularly, for instance, economic systems. So the opportunity here, if you look at, if climate, well, as the suffering continues and you see breakups, revolutions, perhaps even the destruction of nations, imagine what would happen if the US broke apart, China doesn't hold as a nation, there's revolutions everywhere. So this overarching political, national structures are down. And along with that, if you imagine financial systems break down, banks can't talk to each other, the dollar, the money doesn't have any more power. There's disaster in a sense, but in another way, it's also an opportunity because it opens up everything. It clears the slate for a lot of the stuff that's oppressing people. And the thing is, what I'm seeing is individuals are the ones who support the systems. So what I'm saying is we need to be also thinking of how we support systems, how we support, for instance, the capitalistic systems that destroy resources, that accumulate wealth for certain groups, not only capitalistic systems, but other systems too, And that may become an opportunity when you have when all you have are communities on the local level that are trying to survive somehow. They may be the only thing that survives when nations break up, when all these other things break up. So anyway, that's my reflection here.
Early on, I think it was maybe even before this week's reading, he mentioned about how technology could be picked up though, because we can do so much with technology. And I think that, and also then he mentioned something about the older people are the ones that are going to make the change. And I really disagree with that because I really am leaning heavily on saying what technology can do, because I've realized, like here we are on Zoom, but if somebody really got into this and shared a dream with a bunch of people that had any kind of power and decided to get people from all over the world to sign in on it, there's going to be a lot of anger that happens from the top, because the top is going to have to fall. The social well-being, the United States is built on commercialism and always want it to be better, and you want to die with being the best of who you are. But that's not what's going to save the world. And I have a grandson who is raising a lot of stink in his family because they don't agree with him. And yet he's very intellectual and he knows how to do all kinds of things with computers. And I could see him as one of those that just sort of implements. You somehow have to get the dream of possibility to where the power is.
Thank you.
The dream.
Yeah. We're about a quarter of an hour past our technical stopping point. So I'm going to kind of bring this. I don't want to bring the conversation to a close. I want the stewing to continue. Thanks to all of you who are sending around thoughts by email and putting things in our group journal. We need to continue that as we move to our closing session next week, which is on integration. What's been learned? What's shifted? What's next for you? Take one step to advance some of this in your life and share what that is. And read pages 155 to 159. as well. And we'll send that around. Continue the conversation, talk with each other. And I'd like to ask Judy Lindblad now if she would close our session with a dedication. Judy.
Is this the short one or the longer one?
Ah, the book you want to read or?
No. I'm asking Jim, but that's, yeah. So let's pause for a minute and closing your eyes and bringing your awareness to your breath, the breath that the very breath of creation. Now direct your awareness to what's here. You may notice sensations in your body, emotions or thoughts. Whatever arises is welcome. Now let's take a moment to acknowledge one another and to honor our collective presence and our time together that has been a very enlivening time, perhaps a little disturbing. And we ask that our time together benefit Mother Earth and all of the life she holds, the potential that is there. And we dedicate the benefit of our group today, I would suggest, to the community builders that are out there, the reconcilers, the communicators, the consensus seekers. There are in communities those who are in eco villages, those who are in transition towns. There are sustainability cities, eco civilizations. And in this gathering, there are people with deep wisdom on community building. And it is with that we dedicate this time, that the seeds that are there will support the innovation and will be a place of attention and strength and curiosity in this coming week. So be it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you, Judy. And those of you that can stay on for another 10 minutes, especially the breakout room leaders, to get a little bit of a fix on next week.
Thanks, everyone. Be well. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.
You too.
So how'd your teams go? Good conversation? Get somewhere?
Yeah.
Any thoughts for next week and how we wrap this up?
Are we going to wrap it up?
I wanted to make one comment about tonight. I liked hearing from the 4 groups. I think having a deeper dive was a good idea. So appreciate you guys suggesting that. And I think that was good to create the space to hear from the 4 different groups. So I appreciate that. And next week, I think I would like to see maybe something similar where we spend time in our small groups for a while, looking at actions that we can each take, and then come back with some kind of reflection or sharing on our time together, because this has been what, eight sessions totally that we've had.
Mhm.
In another session that I was leading a little part of it, I thought that we used well some time where we reflected on our own in quiet. And I think we did that time 5 minutes. And I think you could do 10 minutes of reflection in your own journal. And you could be writing down what's the edge for you of where you want to be moving, where you need to be moving. And you could come up with maybe some kind of a phrase or a symbol that would hold that.
I like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Other thoughts?
Going along with actions we can each take might be some conversation about actions we might take as a group, and or even also combined with other groups that have been studying this same material with Dwayne Elgin. And so so the question is more how, in addition to individual steps we might take at our very local levels, how might we as a group begin to see ourselves as a contributing group to something larger with other similar groups? How might we tie in or connect or move forward in a way that connects us with other similar groups?
So we might think about whether we want to, one option is to do a second breakout based on these folk, that is, people say, I'd like to work on X, and other people can join them in an actual breakout. It makes your breakouts, either they have to be able to choose their own, or you have a little more complex time assigning them. Another option is people type the topic in the chat, and then others sign on to that topic in the chat. But when they actually talk about it is later. They don't have to talk about it in the session. We have a dialogue group that's been meeting for 6 weeks. And this is one of the ways we close the 6 weeks, is to have people be able to suggest topics that they want to continue to explore. And
Okay.
then individuals can sign in, but they don't have to. If we have time, we break them and let them break into those teams for 5 minutes, just sort of basically to do logistics kind of conversation. Anyway, it's just a thought. I'm complete.
If next week is the last session, do we want to spend time on sharing our insights in terms of how the study method can be used again with other groups? In other words, as we went through this study, we've experienced it, and we may have some ideas as to where it works, how it can be improved. Do we want to get that kind of feedback as well? Just asking.
I like that.
Yeah, it's worth it, I think.
I think, Jim, I noticed you said something about, well, Colleen had originally asked if we wanted to do like a survey of all the group members, and you had raised that question I saw today in an email. So just to, Dharma, with your question, do you think a survey would fill some of that? Or do you think it needs to be some joint discussion where we come up with a consensus of view on that?
It was more of, not so much of a consensus, but more of harvesting whatever experiences we've had, stepping back from the issue of what the book says, but looking at it in terms of how the journey has been. In case, I'm sure you want to do this study with other groups. So how can our experiences benefit that kind of thing? Yeah.
I find that the list in that last chapter 14 is a pretty good list from the standpoint of asking questions, both not only about ourselves, but about people that we come in contact with. For example, you might look at the people that you come in contact with and say to yourself, who needs to answer the question about how they can be more deeply informed? Who needs to choose simplicity? Who needs to discuss protection and restoring nature? And both from a standpoint of how can we do it and how can we help other people that we come in contact with. Each of those areas that he lists there, I think there's 10 areas.
11. There's 11. There's
11,
one on the
okay.
next page.
Yeah, yeah.
What about,
I like that idea, David.
Yeah.
Just thinking about combining that with Nancy's suggestion of doing a journaling exercise. If there was some journaling around those, people have look at those 11 areas and then maybe journal on some of those questions of where do you want to put your energy and how might you be able to move this forward, or where do you see a need for that, something of that nature.
okay,
I don't know how, I'm sort of an interloper maybe at this point, but one of the things that has struck me is this idea of electronic town meetings. And that combined with number 2, cultivate your true gifts, sort of made me think that a light went on. I don't know how we would pursue that kind of, whether that's at one point, how that would be considered. But I feel that in terms of the future, that is something, a place where we have gifts. And how do we be responsible about that? I'm complete.
thank you all. Anything else?
Who's got the bird?
I have 3 birds.
Ah.
Oh, wow.
2 birds that live here and a neighbor bird whose family's gone on vacation. Sorry about that.
Bird sitter.
Is there anybody who's interested in working with David and I to try and come up with a plan for next week? I mean, I'll rope all of you in, but I was just.
I really don't have time, but I did put in the debrief piece that we're doing for this dialogue group we're working with, just as an example of a way that you can send something to people earlier. They can begin their debrief as a journaling piece. And then when they come into the session, you can have some piece of conversation, but then they can also continue to work later. Anyway, there are 3 options for different ways that we've thought about. One's a focused conversation, one is a sort of a game, and the others, anyway, the 3 different, we're going to use, it's in the chat. We're going to use the focused conversation version. But the other two were just scenarios that we came up with as possible ways to do it. So we're going to send it out to people. We sent it out to people yesterday, and then tomorrow night we're going to meet with them, and they will have had a chance to start their own journal, and then we'll do a corporate piece at the end of the session, and then they'll have time to finish work on it and send it in later. I'm complete.
Larry, there's some really old people on this call who maybe get confused about downloading chats and stuff like that. Could you send that to me as an email attachment?
I certainly can.
Old-fashioned.
I can certainly do that.
All right.
My computer is ambidextrous.
Thank you.
This was great. I just clicked on it.
Yeah,
I clicked on it and it popped up. Try it.
Yeah.
I got it like,
tried that and
click
I-
on it and it
That's
just
very
gave
cool.
it to me.
I tried that and
Immediately.
it said something I didn't understand.
Yeah, that's because it's in Chinese. No, it's not. It's in English. Anyway, Jim, I am sending it to you as we speak.
Thank you. And
Jim, in answer to your question, if I think you and David have done a wonderful job of putting together this material up to this point.
Yeah.
But if I can be of any assistance, I could help after Wednesday. I can't do anything before Wednesday, but Thursday or later, would be willing to help if there's any help I can provide.
Thank you.
I don't mind.
I could
know what
do
Louis
something.
Pierce was doing with his.
Louis, did you want to add something?
Hey, Louis.
I'm out of town in a rural clinic and I'm saying goodnight to my dear wife, but
Oh,
she doesn't pay any,
Oh.
she doesn't pay any attention to me.
sorry.
Good night, everybody else. Good night.
Breakout room.
Well,
You're in the
I'm glad
deep
we gave
weeds, it
you-
looks like.
Great job.
All
Where
right.
are
Glad we
you?
gave the two of you a chance to connect.
They can
Hey,
reply-
Larry, may
Yes.
I ask you a question? I read something today that there was a terrible train crash in Taiwan. What
Yes.
can you say about that?
Well, is there a new one or is this the one from a couple
No.
months ago?
Oh, well, I just heard it today.
Well, I haven't looked at the news today, but because this was my first session. But we did have a terrible accident 2 months ago, and it has been, the tracks have all been repaired and everything, but there's a whole
wow.
assessment
Okay.
going on to the across the train system of Taiwan relative to. I mean, this is, what do you call it? This is part of this whole thing, same as the Florida falling down thing.
Yeah.
How Taiwan's rail traditionally is very super duper at assessment and tracking and all this kind of stuff. So this really freaked them out because this is literally not supposed to happen, and they're supposed to have backups on backups and stuff. But it was both human error and a structural issue. The human error was somebody parked their truck on a hill above a tunnel.
Yeah.
Waited and then gravity waited for the last train to go through, and then the truck fell, and then the next train.
That's
So
what I
part
read
of it
about
was
today.
just the way life is you can't plan everything.
Okay.
But there were some other issues.
All right. I'm
Okay.
going now.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's an
all.
article about it today.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, there may have been
Yeah.
another
Yeah,
one,
that's-
but there
yeah.
it's
No,
In the New
possible.
York Times.
Same